do one of these?
Oh yeah, that is the questionnaire. Do you have one? Yeah, okay, grand, okay, lovely. Okay. So welcome back to the remaining sessions then. We have 3 to go through, and the first is gut function and immune health. So we've mentioned a little bit about digestive health in the presentation, the contextual presentation at the outset of the afternoon. And I think we're going to be reading more and more about microbes and how we can affect what's growing in the colon in the next number of years, because it's an evolving science, it's very interesting, and it seems that not only are we covered in terms of our skin with microbes, but that the microbes in the digestive tract are particularly important to us. And we have, as I've said, a symbiotic relationship with them. In other words, we give them something, but they also give us something in return. So we'll come on to that in a minute, but just to remind you about the digestive tract, because some of you might not have seen this for a number of years since school days. The digestive tract is probably about the length of a double-decker bus. So it's long, and there are many parts of it. So it starts, obviously, the digestion in the mouth with the release of amylase, which starts to break down the carbohydrate. And of course, this is one thing that we're trying to remind clients all the time, about is the importance of chewing your food well to start digestion. Obviously, it only takes a couple of seconds, about 8 seconds, for the food to slip into the stomach, where the acid starts to break down the components of that food. And as the acidic contents then swing into the duodenum and the small intestine, it's alkalized. The contents of the digestive tract is alkalized, probably by a number of the enzymes and the release of juices from the pancreas and things that aren't strictly part of the digestive tract, but nevertheless play a key role. So in terms of just the length of time, it takes about 4 hours generally for food to go through or pass through the stomach, and another 4 hours to pass through the small intestine. And it's there that the nutrients are really assimilated into the body, so they're absorbed into the body. And so the small intestine is really, really important for us, very important in terms of extracting the goodness from the food that we eat and allowing our bodies to utilize that to build new cells and to help things to function properly. So we really definitely are what we eat and what we absorb, what we break down and absorb. The food then enters the large digestive tract, or the colon, and it can actually stay in the colon for anywhere between 4 and 72 hours if you have a very sluggish system. So think about that. We're talking about days, spent in the colon. Sometimes it's not healthy to have food sitting there too long, and we also know then we have problems associated with that. For example, constipation, really, because if moisture is retracted and kept and reabsorbed back into the body, the stool can be very hard and difficult to pass and can cause problems there. So the transit time is varied between individuals, and sometimes it can be affected by what's going on in your head. Yes, in your head. So if we're very stressed and agitated and maybe emotional, it can actually quicken the peristaltic movement of the digestive tract, so much so that it can cause an urgency to go to the loo, or spasm and diarrhea, or a number of different various side effects. So we are connected. It's not that the digestive tract, which we often see displayed like this in our science books, is separate to the rest of the body. We are absolutely and utterly connected in every sense of the word, with the brain affecting the motility in the gut, how it performs, the speed and the transit time of the food through it, and likewise the metabolites of the bacteria that grows in the gut, that feeds on the food that we put through the digestive tract, in turn affecting our mood and our maybe risk of depression. So it's an interesting, a very interesting, I suppose, circular communication between gut and brain. And sometimes I like to talk about it as being a massive food processor, because that's actually what it does. It takes a lot of food, it gives us a huge amount of nutrition if it's working correctly, and then it also feeds the good bacteria. And so we mentioned resistant starch and the importance of that, and the fibers that we used to think, they just are kind of what we call nature's broom. They help us to bulk up the stool and to pass it easily. But now we realize, no, that it's far more important than that. The fibers are consumed or are used as a substrate by the bacteria, which in turn produce things like B vitamins for us. So they produce vitamin K and some B vitamins. They also produce sometimes a little bit of energy, but they produce other things like metabolites. Again, these can be good and bad depending on what's growing there. So the good ones produce short chain fatty acids like butyrate, which are a very good and positive thing to be producing in the colon, and seem to help protect us against certain types of cancers. So it is really important that we're mindful of the two parts of this symbiotic relation. It's what we give the bacteria and what in turn we rely on them for this symbiotic relationship to be a win-win. We're going to read a lot more about the pathogens that are found to maybe control or manipulate the microbiome to their own advantage and cause disorders and diseases in the future, because we're researching so much in this area, and right around the globe now there's fantastic, interesting findings about both good and not so good bacteria. That, as I said, both probably have a role to play and a place in the gut, but it's important that we have the balance in favour of the ones we want to promote and flourish so that they're thriving at the expense of the pathogens or the unhealthy bacteria. And you can see here, this is actually from, I think it's from the Huffington Post. So again, you know, it's quite complex looking, but it's just showing you that there's a lot more of this information, this scientific information being disseminated out now to your customers. So your customers are reading this going, I wonder, do I need, you know, some probiotic to help with maybe, you know, some of these conditions here? Because you can see that we all have a different fingerprint, and we don't really know what is the optimal fingerprint in terms of our microbiome. But we do know that people who are not normal weight for their height, so for example, those who are very obese, and indeed those who have anorexia, seem to have a different type of microbiome, and the species are slightly different in varying quantities than those in a normal weight for height person. It is really interesting, the type of animal work that's going on. So for example, they've managed to take the gut bacteria from obese mice and place them into germ-free mice. They're all fed exactly the same food, but the control mice remain normal, but the ones that are actually have this obese gut microflora, they become obese. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? Now, it doesn't mean that, you know, obviously this is going to work in humans, but it's fascinating really. And they can reverse it by killing off the bacteria as well and giving the mice antibiotics. So it's really, really interesting what's going on. And it really helps us to understand that these little microorganisms may be helping us to even choose certain foods over other foods or behave in a certain way. They maybe have a bit more control in certain situations than we might have thought. And there are some scientists being very funny and flippant and saying, actually they're in charge. They've got the reins. You know, they're just carrying a few human cells, because there are more bacteria and microbes than there are human cells in the body. So it is fascinating. There's more genetic material from the microorganisms than there are human genomes. So it is interesting to see, you know, this science and how it's going to evolve. I suppose from our point of view today, we just want to focus primarily on the immune system, because that's really important. And you can see here from this slide that 70 to 90% of your immune system is located in your gut. So we do have things like saliva, which is an antibacterial mechanism. You know, so when something gets stuck in your eye, it will prevent an infection. Your tear ducts, your tear will have a little antimicrobial agent in it. So everything from, you know, the hairs in your nose to the tears in your eyes, they're all designed to prevent things infecting eye and nose, etc. But by far the predominant part of the immune system is the gut. And that's why it's so important, and that's why I suppose you might have heard all disease begins in the gut. You can see that there are 100 trillion bacteria in our colons, including over 1,000 different types, which most of them being beneficial, thanks be to goodness. And that's why we keep functioning as we do. And then they just have, at the far right-hand side, a picture of the brain versus the bacteria. And you can see the human brain is 3 pounds, but the bacteria living in the healthy body is about 3.5 pounds. So a little heavier in terms of its weight. So maybe if you just wanted to look at your own weight, you could probably subtract 3.5 pounds from your actual weight on the scales if it's not looking so good today. Okay, so the mechanisms of action of these bacteria are many and varied, and they're quite interesting. So they do a lot of different things, and I've mentioned some of them. So here you can see number 3, the production of growth substrates. So these friendly bacteria called the commensal bacteria, the ones that are naturally present in the gut, and also probiotics, which maybe we have eaten in the form of a natural yogurt, or maybe in the form of kimchi, which is a cabbage which is fermented, or perhaps kombucha or something like that. So these are probably eaten probiotics, and this is a commensal good healthy bacteria. And both of those are producing vitamins in the digestive tract. So you can see that they have a very useful role to play from this point of view. The other thing that they do is that they compete with the bad guys for food, for substrate. So if there's a lot of, you know, the friendly guys in the gut, then obviously that's good for us. They get more of the food, they flourish and thrive. If we've done something to upset that balance, if we've taken a course of antibiotics and we've knocked out the balance of the microbiota, then we may have a difficulty in, you know, getting back to some sort of good shape again, unless we're careful in what we eat and in maybe supplementing with the right type of probiotic as well. So yes, so it competes with for nutrients and prebiotics. Prebiotics I'll come on to in a minute. And also these probiotics have actually antimicrobial substances in them. So they actually repel or, get the upper hand on the bad bacteria in many cases themselves. You can see that there's a role here in the reduction of inflammation. And remember, inflammation is key in most disease states. You know, most disease at cellular level involves some sort of inflammation. So some of these bacteria, the good guys, are anti-inflammatory, and some of them stimulate the immune system. So if you look at number 6 there, these probiotics are actually talking to this dendritic cell in the body and saying, please be on alert, there's a pathogen here beside me. So you can see that the dendritic cell produces T cells, B cells, and antigens, antibodies, and you can see that these attack some of the common problem and parasites and pathogens in the body and prevent them from getting in. And you can see here, number 7, competitive exclusion and barrier function. So again, if there's more of the good friendly bacteria than there are of the pathogens, they kind of keep the bad guys away. They keep them from attaching and getting in between the cells into the body. This is the body here, and this is the lumen, which is the tube inside which the food travels. And you also can see that they are actually a physical barrier as well. So some of these bacteria physically keep out the bad bacteria. So you can imagine that you really want the good bacteria to thrive and flourish, as opposed to getting anything else growing and flourishing in the gut, which may have adverse effects on the body. So this is just a quick case study, Ali. And Ali looks as if she's working a little bit too hard here, maybe multitasking. She has abdominal pain because of the stress of the type of work and the pace of her work. She feels pretty bloated and swollen, excess wind, frequent diarrhea and urgency to go to the loo. She has restricted dairy and gluten with a bid to maybe see does that make any effect or have any effect or make an improvement on her symptoms. And she gets frequent respiratory infections. So she seems to be coming down a lot with colds and various different respiratory coughs and things that plague her. She did have a bad gut infection about a year ago, and she took a course of antibiotics. So just in terms of maybe the questions or the issues that might be relevant to her, can anybody suggest what we might look at? Come on, you're not that shy. Yeah. A bit louder because I'm so far away from you, I can't hear you. We don't have a microphone. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there are a number of things, and certainly probiotics are in the mix here. So let's have just a little look here. The difference between probiotics and prebiotics, just to remind you again. This is the gut, okay, and these are the probiotics, and these are prebiotics, okay. Now, this is not really relevant, only to show you that list here are probiotics, and probiotics are generally live. They're in live foods. By that I mean they're usually bacteria or yeast that have an effect in terms of a benefit. They need to have a benefit, okay? And good sources are yogurt, kefir. Have you heard of kefir? It's usually kind of like a milk drink that's fermented. You find it a lot in European countries, but it's very slowly coming in. I think we have maybe 1 or 2 different types of kefirs on the supermarket shelves at the moment. Buttermilk was one that we used to use quite considerably in former days, but not so much now because we've moved away from the lovely brown breads that we used to make for the more convenient options from the supermarket. But buttermilk, and people used to actually drink it, it doesn't actually mean that the milk is full of butter. It's a little bit of a bad name, really, because it is actually very low in fat, and there's no butter in it. It has very little fat, but it is very, very useful in terms of its probiotic content. So if anybody does use it at home, it's a good probiotic live food. Aged cheese, sauerkraut, kimchi. Kimchi is one I mentioned. It's like a fermented cabbage, a bit salty. Sourdough bread, miso. Some of the Japanese foods here like tempo and miso. Kombucha. People are making now that, making that at home, but you can also get commercial varieties. Don't focus too much on the beer and wine here on this list, okay? But yeah, that's interesting. Some of the craft beers are very popular now, but probably not advisable in large amounts. So yeah, you get live bacteria and microbes in many foods. Now, are these enough if you've whacked out of place the balance, if you've taken, say, an antibiotic? Probably not. Probably not. And also, we don't really know the breakdown of the species and what is in each of these different types of foods. But we do know that they're good foods to include, and they are healthy foods and definitely should be part of our diet if we can include them. Great, we should be drinking them and eating these a little bit more. The prebiotics, on the other hand, so these are going to put what we call transient good friendly bacteria into the lumen, into the passage where the food passes, okay? So we're deliberately putting food in there which can have a probiotic effect. But the prebiotics are interesting because these are natural foods which are fed on or used, parts of them are fed on by the commensal bacteria, which is what is growing in your gut anyway. And these are really useful because we can see things like garlic, leek, onion, wheat, whole wheat, fruits, vegetables and legumes appear in the list of prebiotic foods. Again, these are going to help to feed the good bacteria and help them to flourish. So very important that we look at the prebiotics as well. Okay, so that's the difference between them. And just a picture here, looking at the probiotic-rich foods, just to list them here, and so you can get an idea of some of them. The pickles are becoming very popular. I don't know if any of you have picked them up from supermarket shelves, but they're really popular, really low-fat snack, high in fibre, they're fermented, and yeah, they're really nice as a quick snack, you know, at some stage during the day. Some of the others are an acquired taste, and some of them we don't have a tradition or culture in, but they are now being made in Ireland, and there are commercial varieties available if you don't want to make them at home. As I said, these probably have an unknown effect. They probably have a good effect, but we don't really know what effect these have. But there is obviously scientific evidence behind some of the probiotics that we have in supplement form. So that's important. But the best thing is to try and feed the good guys through the prebiotics primarily. And you can do that by any number of ways. Here are the garlic cloves in amongst all of these types of prebiotics like onions and other root vegetables, which are really useful. Now, Ali probably has some type of IBS, and I suppose one of the questions would be for her, do you have IBS? Have you seen your doctor, your GP? Do you think you have IBS? Do you think you'd be interested in going for further testing to a gastroenterologist? Because that would be important as well if she had a history which she could go through with the GP to determine whether she had IBS or another type of disorder like inflammatory bowel disease or celiac disease. Because the symptoms of bloating, distension, urgency to go to the loo, they're quite common, and they can maybe be prevalent in a number of different disorders. So we can't automatically say you must have IBS. It's really important that we urge that customer to go and maybe have the necessary testing they need. But some people we know are coming in trying their own diets. So the low FODMAP diet has helped. In terms of the research, 70% of people with IBS type symptoms. And I have co-wrote a book with another dietitian, Lorraine Marr, and that's going to be in your hamper as a little prize. But we've sort of put together a few recipes for those people following this type of diet so they don't find it really boring or difficult. But it is really, I suppose, it's quite a detailed diet, and there are 3 phases in it. There's an exclusion phase at the beginning, then a reintroduction phase, and then there's the modified diet, which excludes the triggers of IBS in these people. And it's a dietitian-led intervention. So what I would say to you is if the customer is reluctant maybe to go to a gastroenterologist, maybe a trip to a dietitian and the GP would be better, rather than just self-diagnose the issue. You know, they may have more luck with trying to urge somebody who has a variety of symptoms to have the correct testing. But you can see here that for the people following the low FODMAP diet, there is the exclusion in the initial phase, the 6-week phase, of many really good prebiotic healthy foods. And that's why we don't really consider this a good idea to adopt yourself, because what happens is people can feel so good on the exclusion part of the diet, they don't want to reintroduce really important foods which are possibly prebiotics for the good commensal bacteria. So we don't know what the, I suppose, the outcome is if people exclude prebiotics from their diet in the long term unnecessarily. What does that do to the gut bacteria in the long term? We don't know. So it's really important that the advice and the low FODMAP diet is executed appropriately by the right health professional, as opposed to just, you know, picked off the internet and followed by, you know, somebody who suspects that they have IBS symptoms. And we do see this probably happening. And ultimately, you know, it can cause somebody with celiac disease not to realise they have celiac disease and to have problems associated with that later on. So here are some of the prebiotics like peas, beans and lentils, fantastic foods for the gut bacteria. But some of us don't like them. Some of us have problems, again, with wind if we consume these too much. What I would say to you, if that's you, don't worry. These foods are, you know, wind producing, as are the broccolis and the cauliflowers and the brassica vegetables. It's a matter of titrating very slowly, you know, upwards in terms of the dose, and not to, you know, sort of have too much of them initially at any one time. So you build them very slowly and gradually into your diet, and that way your system gets used to it, and perhaps maybe there's a small but significant improvement in your microbiome. We mentioned resistant starch. That's really important for the good bacteria. And on the low FODMAP diet, we really tend to avoid wheat and wheat bran. So if somebody is constipated, we do not recommend they take wheat bran. We recommend they take linseed instead, okay? And it's really important that they still have some fiber in their diet, because that's what the good bacteria grow on. So we absolutely try and urge them to have more oat-based products. So whether they're like flapjacks or energy balls or no cook muesli or no cook oats, overnight oats, porridge, all of those types of breakfasts are brilliant for the digestive tract, and they don't seem to upset. So their oats and oat foods are allowed on the low FODMAP diet, and they're massively encouraged, because we really need to replace some of the lost fiber when following that diet, even for the 6 weeks. Some of the teas, like chamomile tea, is not allowed on a low FODMAP diet, but there are other teas like antioxidant-rich green tea allowed, and there is some interesting developing evidence around artificial sweeteners now that they may not be very good for the gut bacteria. And there is some published work in this area which I found really interesting. To be honest, again, artificial sweeteners just keep encouraging a sweet tooth. And what we really want to do is to adapt to less sugar. So, rather than kind of do it half-baked and removing refined sugar, but going on to lots of artificial sweeteners, a better strategy for all of us in terms of health might be to reduce sugar very gradually, build in a couple of treats, of course, but reduce, dependence on refined sugar, and not have the artificial sweeteners, but really rely on natural sugar in fruit and the like. So if we're having a dessert, it's a fruit-based dessert. There are other natural sweeteners that we can use, but really I wouldn't encourage a lot of artificial sweeteners for anybody, and particularly not for kids. So the Diet Coke and things like that, I think the days of those soft drinks hopefully are going to be curtailed somewhat. I know they have massive marketing budgets, but we really do need to get the message across that, we need to encourage more water consumption right across the board, as opposed to a reliance on caffeine and sugar or artificial sweetened drinks. So alcohol intake, again, alcohol and caffeine, they can both be irritants for sensitive digestive tract. And obviously when you have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, is really a hypersensitive gut. So there are some things that will trigger symptoms in people who have hypersensitive guts, and too much caffeine can be a trigger for some people, as can alcohol. So alcohol is allowed even on the low FODMAP diet, but it's really recommended that you stick to a drink at a sitting. It's not great, is it? And for some of us, we might say, do you know what, I'm going to just avoid it. It's not really worth it. But it's a personal thing. But again, I have met some people who can get away with slightly more than that, but it's not and Irish people love to try and push, don't we, to see what we can get away with. But generally speaking, most people would be advised to really curtail and limit their alcohol content if they have a hypersensitive bowel. Just in terms of the caffeine and the hidden caffeine, I think, in beverages in particular, just to point out that, and this came up before for pregnant women and lactating women, that sometimes we can absent-mindedly pick up a drink when we're in the forecourt, when we're picking up the paper and getting our petrol. But it's important to realise that a lot of hidden caffeine can be found in some of these larger volume drinks. And when you see the servings of some of these, like this one here, this monster drink here, you can see that in a 500 ml serving, it has 55 grams of sugar, and 160 milligrams of caffeine. So you can see it has the equivalent of 2 espressos in terms of the caffeine, and 14 teaspoons of sugar. Teaspoons. So if you could imagine kind of pouring 14 teaspoons of sugar into a glass with nothing else in it, and then you put 2 espressos into it, and then you put a bit of, colouring in, and you handed it to a child, what would you feel? Like, I mean, it's not something that we would ever do. None of us would do that. Yet these things are available on the supermarket shelves, and people without knowledge are actually picking them up, unfortunately, not realising the contents within. So it is something to watch out for. This was produced by Safe Food, again, one of the websites that I mentioned, Safe Food and Food Safety Authority of Ireland. They've got nice infographics and things like that. If you did have a nutrition folder, you might want to pull out some of these things, print them and put them into your folder. Take time out. I suppose this is the most important thing for the stressed individual, Ali, that we looked at the case study, because there are 3 pillars in managing IBS. There's exercise, and that's really important for the bowel as well, because not only do our muscles need to be exercised, but we know that there are 50 different benefits, one of them being that it really helps in terms of digestion as well. So exercise is a pillar of management, but also it helps to de-stress us, and stress management is the other pillar. So even if you didn't exercise, anything where you can get out of your busy head and the worry head is really important for those people with irritable bowel syndrome, because again, of the connection between the mind and the gut. So we need to make sure that we are doing something that we enjoy, whether that's dancing or bungee jumping, although I'm not sure if that would be very de-stressing, but whatever whatever takes your fancy. Yoga, meditation, massage are all fantastic, and I suppose at different ages in our lives we will gravitate to different things. So older people probably might have the patience to sit through the meditation phases, although I was actually at a course recently in meditation, and I was absolutely so impressed with the number of young people that were there. It was brilliant. Young males and females that actually, I wouldn't have had that insight when I was their age, but they totally got it, and they were very impressive in terms of their thoughts on meditation. So gut repair and healing. So not only do we have to put the right food in and maybe the right drinks in that aren't going to aggravate or cause problems in the bowel, but we can also maybe look at a little bit of repair if there has been a bit of damage done. And I suppose there's been limited research in this area, but this is a supplement, zinc carnosine, and there was a PubMed review carried out on this in 2007, which you might like to look at. But just to remind you that zinc is a cofactor in over 300 enzymes. It's involved in gene expression, cell proliferation, and signal transduction. So it's an extremely important little cofactor in these enzymes. And obviously a deficiency affects many of the outcomes that involve these enzymes. And one of them being that zinc is really important in regulating the immune system. So zinc is found in high levels in foods like eggs, animal tissue. So by that I mean a steak or mincemeat. Any animal tissue will have a degree of zinc found in it. But remember that there you go, if you're a vegetarian, you're missing 2 of the best sources of zinc. Legumes, peas, beans and lentils. If you're a vegetarian who doesn't like peas, beans and lentils, then you're really in trouble. Shellfish and fish, obviously the vegetarian isn't going to go there either, most. Pesco vegetarians are probably extremely healthy in that they have lots of plant protein and they eat fish, which is really important for their vitamin D and omega-3 levels. Yeah, so not a huge amount of I suppose, robust research behind these types of supplements, and I would say, look, if you have somebody who's in front of you who eats meat and fish, then probably you're not going to see a significant change in gut health if you suggest a supplement like this. But if you have the right type of patient in front of you or the right type of client who doesn't eat these types of foods, then yes, certainly you could try the zinc supplement. Just in terms of a solo role, zinc, it has been shown in terms of the immune response that taking 75 milligrams in the form of a lozenge spaced throughout the day after the flu and cold symptoms have presented initially, that zinc lozenge may reduce the duration of the illness. So it may. Again, it's a little bit sketchy. They're not huge, robust studies, but they involve small numbers and, you know, maybe not great, you know, methodology, but certainly it is encouraging. And, you know, if you're the type of person who cannot afford to have a lengthy cold, you know, then definitely these could be useful to have in your purse or your case. Vitamin C in general, in the general population, it moderately reduced the duration and the severity of a cold, although it didn't stop people getting the cold in the first place. So vitamin C doesn't really help prevent the cold, but it may shorten the duration and the severity. So again, you know, it depends on who is in front of you. If they're looking for that help and that support, it might be something you might want to boost the intake of vitamin C and zinc. Interestingly, for athletes in particular, who again might be over-exercising or who may have a competition or a big match coming up and who want to be able to perform well, vitamin C reduced the risk of catching the cold by 52% in this particular study. So all of these can be found in PubMed if you want to have a look at this published work. But that was quite interesting. Supplementation after symptoms did present. So in other words, when the people got the cold, the supplement of vitamin C didn't affect really the cold duration or the severity, which is unusual because it did up here. So obviously different populations are interesting as well, you know, and the athlete is different obviously to the general consumer who isn't over-exercising and may get a benefit from vitamin C in terms of their reduction in catching the cold in the first place. Garlic and vitamin D, interesting as well, I suppose. Garlic, in terms of this little piece of work, it only involved 120 people. They were healthy participants between the ages of 21 and 50 years of age, and they were recruited into a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled parallel intervention study to consume 2.5 grams of aged garlic extract versus the placebo for 90 days during the cold and flu season. So that was quite nice because it was randomized. It's a really good type of small study. And although the number of illnesses were not significantly different, the garlic group showed reduced cold and flu severity with a reduction in the number of symptoms and the number of days participants functioned suboptimally. So again, if you've got somebody who is looking for that fix, what can I do to help me because I have to perform at a meeting or whatever, I cannot, and they're actually getting stressed thinking about being ill, then maybe something like this might be something that you could advise on if they are so inclined to take it. But I would also check with your pharmacist if you're going to prescribe or suggest that they take a garlic substance because of maybe the interference that it may have with warfarin or an anticoagulant. Vitamin D insufficiency may adversely affect our immune response as well. Possibly this could be an underlying cause of infectious disease and immune disorders. So again, we would suggest if people feel that they have a vitamin D issue because they cover up well in the sun and they don't eat fish, so they're not getting a good source of natural vitamin D, that they should really have the blood test confirm their levels and supplement accordingly. And as we've said, most of the Irish population are probably at risk of low vitamin D intakes. So back to Ali, abdominal pain, bloating, excess wind, diarrhea, etc. I mean, these are the things that we could look at. Things like a diagnosis from the GP as to exactly what is going on. Is it IBS? Could it be celiac disease? There's a blood test for that. Does she need to go to see a gastroenterologist and maybe have IBD ruled out? This is inflammatory bowel disease. So it can include things like ulcerative colitis and also Crohn's disease. If she has a diagnosis of IBS from the doctor, then maybe the low FODMAP diet is something that she might like to be following. And again, you know, that's dietitian led, so it would be important to maybe support her on that. Probiotic might have been recommended by either the GP or the dietitian, and there are three that with a lot of evidence: Alflorex VSL3 and Simprove liquid, which would be really useful in terms of IBS type symptoms. Because she has diarrhea, I think, then maybe the Simprove liquid would be one that would spring to mind as being a better placed to help with that particular symptom. Does she need to supplement for the immune system because she seems to get recurrent infections, respiratory infections? Maybe vitamin D levels are low, maybe that's affecting because she's restricting on gluten and also dairy, and dairy is going to be a possible source along with fish of the vitamin D if she's having or if she was used to having a supplemented milk. So these are the type of questions you could look at, maybe support with an antidiarrheal agent if necessary, but that should be prescribed by the GP, and there may be some issues with gastric healing after non-steroidal anti-inflammatories as well to consider. So I'm going to leave it there again, but at the end of this particular presentation you'll also see a number of different gut, digestion and immune health supplements which you might like to look through, and they should be there at the end of that particular presentation, and it'll give you some reminders of the type of products available to your clients in that situation.